Kitchen City will turn the city inside out by inverting the home and sowing the kitchen as seeds across the city. My family home and its rooms lack a fixed purpose. Despite designated terms and furniture for each space, a living room can become a dining room or bedroom, whilst the terrace can become the kitchen. We are using a hybridity of type that is neither British nor Iraqi. The kitchen setting has been reappropriated and translated across different programmatic zones in the home. The traditional Iraqi courtyard houses are planned around a central open courtyard, an idle space void of fixed program where inhabitants can extract objects from their periphery and use them as seeds within the courtyard to project new scenarios. The isolated kitchen is located towards the back of the home and is divided by a series of walls that work towards concealing any exposed symbols of kitchen labor. The courtyard enables the women to invent new architecture for cooking and dining, as they transform the courtyard into a space unlike the isolated kitchen and into a new laboratory for collective cooking. The traditions of the courtyard house are transferred to a typical British home. The courtyard vanishes, replaced with a typical British garden, transforming an idle space into a productive landscape. Internal furniture is planted across the exterior, and makeshift cooking spaces are erected within the underutilized portion of the garden. The internal kitchen provides routinized use and behavior, whilst the new kitchen allows users to break from the normalized approach to isolated kitchen behavior. In Maotengchang, China, children undertake full-time exams and parents become the primary carers once again. Mothers move into complexes with idle courtyards. They transform the space into productive laboratories that enable collective cooking and the division of labor. This is important as they begin to appropriate these underutilized spaces and invent new architecture for cooking by turning their homes inside out and pulling objects and furniture into the void. My project is located in San Francisco, where the outdoor culture of the city aligns with the picnic culture and desirable climate. These case studies are important to my process of identifying idle sites across the Strip. These sites are not being used, and many of them are on display and visited infrequently by those in the city. Underutilized sites have been appropriated to house isolated kitchen units known as dark kitchens. These enable us to delegate our cooking needs to restaurants, renting individual units and forsaking dining, allowing customers to choose their own locations. They reappropriate abandoned buildings and underutilized urban spaces such as car parks, where they can adapt the kitchen to function within a trailer. Our kitchens at home are designed as a factory for one and focus primarily on the efficiency of the housewife, enabling her to work in isolation, her behavior dictated by the organization of space, by normalizing routines and use within the kitchen. The design of new spaces across the Strip will create anti-typological kitchens that are neither factory kitchens for one nor efficient industrial production machines, endlessly providing for us when we no longer have the time to cook for ourselves. Instead, they open themselves up to experimentation through new space making. I have extracted a series of themes and conditions that will enable the design and implementation of new kitchens for the city, implanted within 3 specific sites: the beach, the hillside, and the garden. Each seed will respond to its imposed condition, including decontextualized, impermanence, and unfamiliar. The first site is the beach. Typical and familiar kitchens we are accustomed to respond to metric configurations pertaining to a standard contextualized kitchen. The decontextualized factory kitchens reinforce the normative behavior that resides within the domestic realm, whilst new kitchens utilize raised platforms as seeding framework for visitors to begin attaching their own program. Each installation utilizes non-directional kitchens and enclosures that enable the flexibility of collaboration whilst appearing seemingly typical for those unfamiliar with the decontextualized. A series of anti-Neufert kitchens are installed across the beach. Whilst the design of these spaces are anti-gendered and anti-typological, they distort the implied data provided by Neufert. These kitchens can allow for experimentation. Iterative arrangements and layouts challenge the Neufert plug-in kitchen, one that carries a predetermined site prior to deployment. The singular kitchen type cannot serve the needs of everyone and every site. A series of unique kitchens have been designed for sites across the Strip. The kitchens have been designed to become reactive to the needs of the users. Use of space, the level of intimacy, and the enclosure itself can begin to realign itself to appeal to their needs throughout the day. Movement across site begins to blur the distinction between labor and leisure. The kitchen opens itself up to experimentation and the differing scales of cooking. The home is turned inside out, the enclosure drawn back as people design their own program, placing their own furniture and appropriating the voids around the kitchens. The next site, Bernal Heights, is one of the few remaining pastoral sites. A range of primary, secondary, and tertiary trails have been erected over the years. I am working with the desire paths that have emerged across the span of the hill. These informal paths trespass across the primary routes, creating multiple thresholds and blurring the boundaries between the inside and out. The new snaking structure and field seeds the unpredictability of new experiments conducted by the guests. Beyond the new enclosure, an indicative grid of utility posts are arrayed across the hillside. These points enable further opportunities for misuse as guests plug in to extend the domestic within the unruly. Winding around these desire lines, the ground and roof houses a series of kitchen seats, allowing the guests to begin using it like their own house, treating the trails and its surrounding context perhaps as a yard, living room, kitchen, or bedroom. Domestic elements are dispersed along the trail. They have been manipulated until their resemblance to their implied Neufeld counterpart is unfamiliar. The people of the city begin to invert their homes, bringing with them pieces of furniture and creating new scenarios by cooking up new use of space, furniture, and architecture. The hillside house uproots and extracts guests from their familiar association of the house. Where two paths converge, they create a series of new courtyards. Intimacy is malleable, and as visitors move across the path, walls and enclosures melt away to reveal idle trails awaiting reappropriation. The inhabitants bring objects and furniture with themselves as they begin inhabiting the idle landscape. The kitchen seeds a new framework for inhabitation. Unlike the home, the trail incurs constant motion without subdivisions. Instead, the ground treatment begins identifying these spaces, differentiating between what is internal or external. Life and inhabitation bleeds through these boundaries as inhabitants continually add to the landscape, building new scenarios and plugging into the site to enact familiar domestic activities, turning the city inside out and the hillside house into a laboratory where experimentation is sown. The final site is a neighborhood block and its gardens. The houses form a perimeter around subdivided private residential gardens. A series of new kitchens and walkways form courtyards void of furniture and program. The enclosures can begin to unfold and the kitchen is drawn into the void. The boundaries between public and private spaces are demarcated but can be blurred as neighbors move between these spaces. The public and private gardens alongside these new enclosures can incur new modes of cooking and dining, allowing neighbors to work collaboratively and dine in celebration. An extension of the domestic realm, each neighbor can begin bringing furniture with them into these new spaces. The voids can be constantly reinvented, cooking multiple scenarios where intimacy is malleable and activities reflective of the individual needs are not dictated by the design itself. With the kitchen extracted and uprooted from its enclosed domestic setting, residents of the city can now begin manipulating the idle space within their homes. The old kitchen becomes a void for their owners to begin dictating their own implied use of space. The beach, hillside, and garden are used infrequently and do not always permit an extended stay. Serving aesthetic purposes, they are often left idle at different times of the day. The beach enabled a break away from our lives. Mostly on the weekend, we indulge in the leisurely. But here we can arrange the space as an extension of our home. The kitchens are raised upon sturdier ground, and domestic life unfurls around it. Sand trespasses across the platform, and boundaries between kitchen and non-kitchen spaces are blurred, labor and leisure transcending beyond sight and space. The hillside incurred constant motion, jogging or walking alone or together, the unfamiliar topography making it difficult to prolong our stay beyond a daily exercise. Hillside house enables us to deflect from the path and our routines. Acting as an extension of the home, the hillside and its landscape becomes our yard, kitchen, or bedroom. Kitchenly elements such as the faucet are located at different points on the worktop or ground. Guests can use them to cook, wash dishes, garden, or fill a paddling pool. Residents can build upon what exists, designing their own use of space. The garden and structure seeds the possibility of building new furniture, growing more food, and prescribing new function to space. The gardens were primarily used as aesthetic devices, used infrequently and perhaps mostly by children, with many not having access to their own. Here the block is transformed into a giant house and transcends beyond the routines of internal and external spaces. The kitchens, gardens, platforms, and courtyards enable multiplicity. Step floors become tables and chairs, allotments can begin feeding the kitchens, and residents extend domesticity beyond party walls. The reappropriation of idle space can then make its way into our homes. The kitchen's extraction reveals a void where residents can transform their kitchens into a shelter for their pets, a garden, or art studio. Kitchen City reveals itself to the multiplicity of scale and use. In doing so, these anti-typological kitchens invent new forms of cooking, dining, and social interaction, revealing the potential of the void through the extraction and seeding of new experimental kitchens.